to live stream. There we go.
Another got it.
Mhm.
And Mr. Westmoreland popped in. So
Hello.
I'll call the, hi. I'm going to call the meeting for the Norwalk Housing Corporation to order. Attending is myself, Kelly Bloom, Mary Peniston, David Westmoreland, and Lisa Cooper. From the staff, we have Brian Bedoli, Executive Director, and Eugenia Lupinski, and Katie, last but not least. Any public participation? None?
Does not look like it, no.
Okay, we'll go on to administration, approval of the minutes from the March 14th meeting. I assume everyone had a chance to go through that. Does anyone have any corrections or comments or adjustments? Seeing none. All in favor of approving the minutes of March 14th? Aye.
Hi.
Approved. Move on to the financials. We have a motion to approve the Norwalk Housing Corporation Statement of Revenues and Expenditures and balance sheets for all funds for year-to-date through March 31st, 2023. Eugenia?
Yes. Okay, for the year-to-date, March 31st, Fund 400 had $64,000 in revenue and $61,000 of expenditures, which resulted in a $3,000 net operating surplus. And the balance sheet for this fund had assets of $733,000 and liabilities and net assets of $733,000. And then for Fund 450, the Norwalk Revolving Loan Fund, at March 31st had a net operating deficit of $946. And the balance sheet for this fund had $128,000 in assets and $128,000 in liabilities and net assets. And that's all for Norwalk.
Any questions, comments, observations? Seeing none, do I have a second on that motion? Lisa Cooper, all in favor? Aye.
Hi.
Unanimous. Any other business, new business or old business for Norwalk? None, seeing none. Do I have a motion to adjourn? I'll make the motion. All in favor? Unanimous. Norwalk is over, and we'll turn to the Norwalk Redevelopment Agency, calling this meeting to order. And the roll call, we have myself, Kelly Bloom, Mary Peniston, David Westmoreland, and Lisa Cooper, the commissioners. Any public participation? None. Moving on to administration. Approve the minutes of the April 19th, 2023 special meeting. Do I have a motion to approve those?
So moved.
Kelly, anyone has any questions, observations, changes? Seeing none, I have a second on that motion. Lisa, all in favor? Aye. We'll move on to the financials. Okay, the first item there is, and I'll make the motion to approve the Norwalk Redevelopment Agency Statement of Revenues and Expenditures and balance sheets for all funds for the year-to-date through March 31st, 2023. Eugenia.
Okay, for the year-to-date, March 31st, Operating Fund 100 had actual revenues of $1,120,000 versus a budget of $1,071,000, which resulted in a $49,000 favorable variance. And the actual operating expenditures of $1,323,000 versus a budget of $1,317,000 resulted in an unfavorable variance of $6,000. And this is due to favorable personnel expenses of $13,000, which was offset by unfavorable administrative expenses of $19,000. And legal fees include $67,000 that was paid to Shipment for the 1517 Chestnut Street, which will be reimbursed to the agency once the LDA is signed. And then the actual net operating deficit of $203,000 versus a budgeted deficit of $246,000 resulted in a favorable $43,000.
Okay.
And then we go to the balance sheet, which is,
Where,
oh, I'm sorry.
okay, go ahead. I'm sorry. It's to you, Eugenia.
Okay.
Continue.
Okay. So the balance sheet for Fund 100 at March 31st had $4,119,000 in cash, accounts receivable due to other funds, property and equipment, and the right of use asset. There's a total of $1,654,000 in net loans receivable and other assets. Deferred revenue had a balance of $146,000, which will be earned when expended, and there's $3,221,000 in net assets. And also included are the financial statements for the other funds. There are no major variances except for Fund 300, which is the CDBG revolving loan fund, and that had an operating deficit of $60,000, which was drawn down and was reimbursed in April. And then Fund 500 had an operating deficit of $40,000, and that will be break even once we bill the grants and we're reimbursed for that.
Any questions? Observations, comments? Seeing none, we have a motion. Does someone like to second that motion? No, said Lisa, second the motion. All in favor of approving the statement year-to-date through March 31st? Aye. Unanimous. We'll move on to item 2, which is to approve all the statements through year-to-date through May 31st, 2023. I said, I'll make that motion. Eugenia, it's up to you.
For the year-to-date period ending May 31st, Fund 100 Operating Fund had actual revenue of $1,381,000 versus budgeted revenue of $1,309,000. And this resulted in a favorable variance of $72,000. The actual operating expenses of $1,632,000 versus a budget expenses of $1,597,000 resulted in an unfavorable variance of $35,000, which is due to an unfavorable variance of $43,000 in administrative expenses, which was offset by a favorable variance of $8,000 in personnel expenses. The actual net operating deficit of $251,000 versus the budgeted deficit of $288,000 resulted in a favorable variance of $37,000.
Any questions? Observations? None? All in favor of approving the operating fund year-to-date through May 31st? Aye. Unanimous. Moving on to approve the fiscal 2023-24 agency fund. Fund 100 operating, I'm sorry. I'll turn it back to you, Eugenia.
I was actually, John, if you don't mind, Mr. Chairman, I was going to just provide a higher level overview and then Eugenia could go into any detail that you all would like, if that's okay.
Okay,
All right. So I don't know if you've had a chance to take a look at the Fund 100 operating budget Eugenia put together and I reviewed. Wanted to kind of just walk through some high level things as they relate to operations and kind of what's been going on between our working arrangement, obviously internal to our work program, but also with the city and the various projects we've been managing on their behalf. So what you have is the typical budget form where we have a year-over-year comparison. So if we actually look, right to left, which is kind of odd, looking from 2020 to 2021 and then up to today, we put together some comparisons for you so you can see kind of, where we're at, where we're going, and where we've been. I think the most notable headline in this whole operating budget is the introduction of a $500,000 grant from the city of Norwalk to help fund operations and help us manage the projects. And I think that's been, since we've done the strategic plan, a lot of that really helped in us solidifying our project management relationship with the city, bringing these zeros up to $500,000. And I think, really just reestablishing us as the sort of entity that we were originally intended to be. But that was super helpful this year, as it was the year that we've actually, if you recall, last year we exhausted our deferred revenues, which is just one of the revenue streams that the agency had from previous development projects many years ago. So this was an important support this was important support that the city gave us for this year to help us continue with our operations and try to develop a more sustainable path moving forward. In addition, there's a number of other grants that we've been able to work, more project-specific grants. Obviously, the MLK Facade Improvement Program that some of you may be familiar with. I'll provide a more comprehensive update in that regard later tonight. But what you will note here is that obviously that our contribution through what was really just the Norwalk Redevelopment Agency grant, which is our own sort of cash, did not carry forward since we had the introduction of the city's capital, but it is reflective, and I'll entertain the questions after once I kind of explain the whole scenario at the bottom line here. So you may be wondering why there's a deficit, but really the way Eugenia preferred to account for this, rather than, it's obviously not coming from the deferred revenues, is to have a deficit which just really represents our cash contribution to our budget. So this is coming from the agency reserve fund, which was the same sort of situation last year. We're dealing with a few modest increases as the offset was less. We were looking at 544 last year in terms of deferred revenue. We got 500,000 to cover it, which was approved by the city. I could answer questions on that later if you have any. So other projects in our grants is sort of our CDBG program. We were able to negotiate an increase in that. And a lot of that's related to the Economic Development Center that we're hosting over at 3 Belden Avenue. And that's for staff time. Other notable items, I think, obviously seeing an increase in the personnel item here at 9.2%. What that is reflective of is a couple things, or a few things actually, is what we did last year is we established a bonus pool, sort of a performance-based increase system, rather than just sort of a standard cost of living adjustment. And what Eugenia baked into this was an assumption of 5% across the board, but that's obviously not, it's going to be based on individual performance. But we wanted to make sure that we had the maximum revenue available just so that we could budget properly for whatever that ends up looking like based on performance reviews. Also, we brought on some additional part-time help to help us with the facade improvement. As I'll update you later, we're sort of staring down the barrel about 25 residential home rehabs for this year. So we brought on some part-time help to kind of help us, address that administrative environment, which is also offset by the funding that the city provided us for facade program administration. So that's that money coming from the city ultimately. We also had a significant increase in sort of benefit costs, and that's just what's passed on to us from the city since we are involved in their plan. And I know Eugenia did have some buffer in these numbers just to cover things just in case. In terms of expenses, we really kept a pretty flat budget. I mean, there's a few things here and there that we increased. Occupancy, I actually expect to be lower than this. If you recall, we had the discussion when we moved to 50 Washington that our lease was up. February 2024 over at 3 Belden. I don't know if you've all been tracking the news, but the city is purchasing that property. So we just started our conversations actually today with them in terms of what that means for us. I think there's a collective understanding that there's some value in having some eyes on the business development center, and then also our back office operations still remaining at 3 Belden. That's sort of the initial conversation in terms of any rent that would occur. I think we're still working to figure that out, but I think I do envision this being less and us being able to consolidate here further and lower this by the end of the year. So modest office expenses. I mean, you're talking $2,000 just based on our tracking from last year. We just wanted to provide a little more cushion. The larger one in terms of training, it's obviously 48% seems like a lot, but we're talking about $6,500, and that's related to a lot of the EPA work that we're getting. So we've done a lot of EPA grants, brownfield contamination grants. So they really kind of expect you to attend their conference and the training sessions that they offer in order to administer those grants. And that's actually grant funded. That'll be funded out of those grants, but it just represents an increase here on our budget. Trimmed up a little bit of the marketing based on what we actually expect to complete throughout the year. So those are the high level highlights. So if you have any questions, let me know. Happy to go over anything. And Eugenia is also here to help.
Brian, I'm sorry.
Bob.
Brian, you said you were going to explain about how the deficit was covered by the reserve fund. You said you had some additional comments.
Yeah, I think basically the long and short of it is that's our contribution to our budget. So when we went before the city and we said, hey, we need X amount of dollars, they said, well, don't you have money? And this was the sort of number that we negotiated out in terms of what our participation would be out of our agency reserve for the overall, we're talking $1.9 million budget, 400,000. So I think, it's less than, it's almost 25%.
All right, I'll ask a question now, Brian. We had a settlement on a piece of property we all know about. Have we been funded? Or have we gotten our money back?
We have not received the funding. I put a call into the Corporation Council to figure out the timing on that. I think there was a 90-day stipulation in order for that to be processed and paid, and I think we're kind of reaching that right now. So we do expect that in the next year, but I think that is not reflected in the budget. That'll just go back into the agency reserve or deferred revenue based on my discussions with Eugenia.
Okay, and how much will that be again, approximately?
$150,000.
Only 150?
Sorry, 650,000.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
It was half of what they ultimately realized.
So that's going to be like 2 years of our operating deficit.
Yeah,
Okay.
and the intent is obviously we have a lot of grant funded projects, so we're pretty beefed up right now. And I think just monitoring that, and Eugenia and I take a pretty close look on our cash flow. We do normal cash flow analyses to determine our spend down rate, and we'll definitely provide that information moving forward.
Okay. Any other questions?
I'm sorry, but
Mary?
so is the intent long-term that the city's expecting us to pay down on our net assets every year as a contribution?
That was the discussion even before I got here. I think they want to see us, obviously have the essence of need. And that's what I really had to demonstrate. It was quite a lengthy negotiation to get the 500,000, considering we went from zero in the tight budget environment this year. But they want some participation in our budget.
I don't mean to be thick-headed here, but it seems that the net effect is to draw down on the net assets of the redevelopment agency. Do you have a sense of, is this city intending to do that until those net assets are depleted?
I don't believe so. The conversations that I've had with them, there isn't a specific number that they've had in mind, but I think this is as far as we could get with them at this point.
Yes. So I'm sorry if these were
Oh,
odd questions, but it's just as an ongoing expense, I just was a little surprised because at that rate, it doesn't give you that many years to align your net assets.
I agree with you, Mary, and I had a conversation with Brian about that earlier, and we're going to look into ways of extending that. So,
and to be honest, that's what I've been doing the entire time I'm here. At the end of the day, we've been pushing that back further and further through the grant revenues that we've been able to achieve, and also these project specific revenues that we've been achieving by the city. You got to remember too, we had a lawsuit that was very expensive in drawing on the whole budget, that we cut the bleeding on that as well. So we're doing what we can, and we definitely want to, continue that, as John just mentioned. It's at the forefront of mine and Eugenia's mind this entire time we've been working together. So.
So for the record, it's no critique of the management of staff of the budget. It was just for clarification to understand what you understood to be the intent of the city. So I just wanted to be clear, it's no critique, just wanting to have greater understanding of what you understand the city to understand.
Right. Thanks.
Any other questions? Comments? Observations? Then I'll call for a motion to approve the fiscal 2023-24 Agency Fund 100 operating budget. Do I
So
see a motion?
moved.
Mary made the motion. I'll second. Okay. Lisa seconded. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Unanimous. And that moves us into business, which I'll turn back to Brian.
All right, so we didn't have much in terms of requisite actions this meeting, apart from the budget and obviously the financial administrative items. But I wanted to follow back up. I promised in sort of the email that I'd sent out. I don't know if you recall, when we canceled the last meeting, I sent a sort of general project update, but I wanted to dive a little deeper just so you know what's going on, what we're all working on, and some of the contracting items, because if you recall, with some of these grant funded projects, we have sort of a larger general authorization to enter into any and all agreements to help with some of the expeditious, procurement and contracting. But I wanted you to be all aware of sort of what's going on with each individual project. And also, I'm sure you're noticing some construction out there and things that are impacting your commutes and daily lives that people may, assume that I'm responsible for. So I wanted to make sure that we all had a chance to talk about them. So the first one here, Pinnacle Development. If you've been over by 467 West Avenue, you'll see that it's going up very quickly over there. I don't know if you've been around the back, but I was really impressed at how fast they got the precast garage up. That's obviously not done right now, but they're moving along with the Toll Brothers project over there at the old Loman site. Our involvement in that is by way of 2 state grants. So we received a $3 million grant from DECD, the Urban Act program, to underground the utilities in the area and do streetscape work. We subsequently, realizing there wasn't, time, a lot of time had passed since that project was scoped and costs increased significantly. We worked with OPM to receive an additional $2 million grant for additional streetscape and underground utility work. That's the work that's actively happening now. So we went out to bid, we negotiated the whole contracts. That work is currently underway, scheduled to be complete, at least the power component by the end of November. Hopefully by the end of the year, they'll be out of there. But there's going to be minimal disruption through a traffic plan that was approved through TMP, Transportation, Mobility, and Parking. So you'll see a little bit of disruption in that area for some of the work that we're doing over there. But all those agreements have been signed. One of them was a pass-through agreement that we were required because the money for the OPM project came through the city and passed through to us just by way of administrative requirements, even though we were actually the granting entity on that project. But that's been signed, so we're moving full steam ahead on that project. Do you want to stop? Is there any questions on that specific one?
See none.
Okay. So the second piece is the 1517 Chestnut project. So that's the land disposition agreement. Darren, myself, and our legal counsel painstakingly negotiated over the past 2 years. It has been signed. So if you recall, I mentioned that we were encumbering expenses, legal expenses, particularly as a result of the land disposition agreement, that were reimbursable items once that was signed. So we're working to compile the requisite paperwork to get those resources back, are reimbursed from the city. The bigger, more interesting piece of it is obviously the 200 unit development that is slated to occur right next to the South Norwalk train station. The city has agreed to dispose or to sell the 60 parking spaces, of the surface parking lot to be restructured in the new development. That hasn't formally transacted yet. The way the current agreement is set up is that it will transact once the entitlements are in place and the permit ready letter is issued by building, so that they know that they obviously have the assurances to purchase the property and they can build the development that they received approval for. That is also going in front of the Planning and Zoning Commission for entitlements. I believe they're shooting for the August 2nd date, but it'll depend on the city side in terms of when that will actually be scheduled. But we're very happy that the LDA went through, not really, primarily because it unlocked the $6 million grant that we received from the Connecticut Challenge Grant in terms of securing that. So we've started that work as well. So we've engaged Redness and Mead and VHB through a procurement to do design outreach and of the roadway network. So you're going to have public outreach meeting in terms of the design of what happens down there to the roadway, streetscape, but also concurrently doing underground utility work. So the scope is to underground from Monroe to Chestnut, and then potentially one way from all the way down to Concord in terms of the street network. But that obviously is going to require a public participation process. The utility work in the LDA is more set. That's what we're going to be undergrounding, and we're working to do by March of 2026 is our sort of time frame on that. I think that's it on that one. Is there any specific questions on that project?
Brian, forgive my poor memory, but was there parking that was going to be part of that was going to replace the 60 parking spaces?
Yeah,
Is
a
that
whole lot.
part-
Yes. Yeah, that's the idea.
Okay.
So they're going to replace the spaces. Not only they purchased the property at Fairmarket Valley, they're replacing the spaces they're taking in the new garage.
So that those 60 public parking spaces will now be available in the garage.
Yes, and they will still be public.
Thank you.
Yeah, and the one thing, I guess the one other piece of this complicated puzzle is the environmental contamination. So I can update you on that front as well. We just met with our LEP today, our licensed environmental professional. We received a $500,000 EPA grant. That wasn't enough really to do what Spinnaker needed in terms of the depth based on the new development plan that wasn't contemplated at the time. So we went to the state, we received an additional $1.3 million, which I think there's going to be an event on the 20th, I want to say, to do that work. So we're basically going to be repositioning the original grant to clean up the portion, the sliver portion. I don't know if you're familiar with the surface parking lot along the train tracks. This is the surface parking lot on the eastern side of the tracks. And then using the new money to excavate and do a little more additional work on the Spinnaker side. So that work, the first part of that work, we're trying to expedite and get done by the end of the year. And then we obviously, in the beginning of the next year, we're going to be trying to do the work for the 1517 project.
And one more thing to refresh my memory, I apologize. Where did we land then on the plans for the moment are stopped for the development of the transit district there? Just refresh my memory where that stands now.
I'm sorry, the transit district in terms of where the station, the bus terminal is, or the.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's part of the community challenge grant. So we're going to be realigning that road and figuring out a new configuration to work with the development. So that's what we're going to have to, that's what we engage VHB for.
And where are we in that process right now?
We just signed the contract. Well, I have it on my desk right now to sign the contract for VHB. So we haven't really started much. There's gonna be public outreach and community input on that one. So you'll see more on that. We're just starting, I guess is what. We have concepts. So when we did all this, like we obviously developed concepts, we had some analysis done, but we need to do a full design. And that's what we're just starting right now.
Okay, because that was the one where there were originally in the design that there were apartments that were going to come right up next to the train station. Is that still part of the idea?
Yes, yeah. And I think the one thing in question is not doing a roundabout there anymore. That's what they're looking at. Because they don't want to lose any more surface parking that a roundabout may cannibalize. So we've been working with VHB and TMP to kind of navigate that. Oh, the other piece too related to this, since it's $1 million is for Columbus Court. I don't know if you're familiar with the condominium across the street, but we we bid that project out. The bids were not favorable. The state asked us to rebid, but we still anticipate starting that work next month, like roofing, siding, and improvements to that entire complex. Any other questions, or are you comfortable with me moving on to Webster Lot? All right. So with Webster Lot, we've some of you have been involved. We've just been engaged in the public outreach process. We've hosted 2 community listening sessions so far with the selected developer, trying to just solicit community input before we get too far along in the site planning process. We actually have another, one of the things I heard during one of the listening sessions was obviously, yes, we're reaching out to the owners of the buildings, but what about the tenants and businesses? So we set up a separate roundtable discussion with tenants and businesses. Our lovely staff, including Katie and our part-timer Nick, have been going door to door with flyers, both in English and Spanish now, to solicit interest for that. And so we can try to get some people that actually just own the businesses or operate the businesses that may not own the property into the discussion. So that's on July 18th. But more to come on that as the details sort of bubble up to the top. Any questions on Webster?
Can you just refresh our memory about the timeline that you're expecting right now, or is that still not clear?
It's still not fully clear. I mean, what they originally proposed was a 40-month timeline. We're probably into month, from outreach, entitlements, construction, the entire thing. We're probably into month 4 or 5 right now. So I would say 3-4 years is what you're looking at to complete that if everything goes smoothly.
So Brian, just a question, and sorry if you already covered this, I got distracted for a moment. Are we looking at taking the building where the Seatown Grocery is and the movie theater and all those as part of this project, redeveloping them?
There's no city taking of the property proposed, but in terms of the developer trying to work out with adjacent private property owners, they are in those discussions right now. Try to make the most.
But there's nothing's been concluded.
Nothing's been finalized. No, we're still in sort of, everyone's kind of dancing right now, trying to figure it all out.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
The one thing that we do anticipate, though, is expediting the cleanup. Obviously, we received 2 grants now. We received a $2 million EPA award just a few months ago, and we had the $2 million from the previous DECD money. So we're still working on contracting, so nothing's going to happen very quickly. But I think getting the site infrastructure set and development ready is going to be the biggest, the first step on the city side in terms of what we need to do as an agency that we'll be involved with.
How are we going to manage the lack of parking whenever the parking lot's torn up for that or the construction of the project? There's a lot of parking there.
Yeah, that's one of the big topics of conversation that we've been dealing with, particularly, working with Mike Oz and the adjacent property owners to minimize that disruption. Obviously, we're going to do phasing as best we can, but I've always been straight that it is going to be disruptive. I mean, it's definitely, there's going to be a period of time. Obviously, we're trying to centralize the garage, where it's going to be focused on the garage construction. We've heard estimates 12 to 18 months. So we're going to have to figure out a temporary parking solution in the interim. And that's, with the precast garage that goes up fast, quote unquote. But it's we're still working with, obviously meeting with Mike Oz, meeting with the developer, trying to figure out what that actually could end up looking like and finding an amenable solution.
Well, is there a way to not disrupt things twice, since we're going to do the garage? It sounds like we're going to do a cleanup first, and that's going to be disruptive and tear things up. I don't know how that works. And you go back and repave and then tear it all up again when you build the garage. Is there a way to just do it all at once?
We can. It's going to depend on the grant requirements and everything in terms of timelines. Is one of the things, this is exactly what we've been encountering with the 1517 project as well. So we have to do the cleanup. There's some advantages. The disruption on the cleanup, I don't anticipate being that prolonged, particularly where the garage is. That's not where a lot of the contamination is mapped. You basically go in, you could do it in a couple weeks typically, or throughout the whole thing. So we could phase it appropriately on that. That's not going to be too much, and then we repave. The reason why, even though it sounds counterintuitive, is number one, we're not going to be going as deep as they need to go in the first place to excavate for a garage or anything like that. And number two, in terms of some of the brownfield environmental contamination programs, there's a period of groundwater monitoring that you need to do in order to enroll in a specific program. And there's some valuation advantages on the land to the city if we clean it up and go through that process before we transfer the land. So, when we transfer the cleanest piece of dirt possible, that there's less liability and less concern, it's better. So that couple weeks disruption can ultimately work in the favor of the city, even though it's like, why you disrupting things twice? I think there's some technical reasons why it may make sense.
Do you have a map that shows where the contamination is that you can send to the commissioners?
Absolutely.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Yep, no problem.
Brian, I
Mary?
had another question, which was the last public hearing I went to, there was still it was still pending about what they were thinking for affordable units and 3 bedroom units. Are there any updates on the affordability, particularly given, well, I won't get into that part, but I'm just wondering if there's any updates on any of that.
Yeah, no specific in terms of the development mix, in terms of the number of the units, because that's still being, drawn out. But in terms of the affordability, we're at 20% currently in the negotiations.
So we're still holding at 20%, and that is actually workforce affordability as opposed to low income affordability, correct?
It's half and half. Yeah, there's a 10%, I believe, at 80% AMI, and then a 10% at 50%. Sorry, 10% at 80% SMI and 10% at 50% AMI. So yes, 10%, yes. We tried to drive for a deeper level of affordability with this project. And also, just so you know, we're still working with if you recall, we engaged the financial analyst firm, infrastructure advisors, to help us with this. So we've been actively going through scenarios with them to see what we can push on. But it's still dependent upon, we're still not really even at that stage. This is all conceptual negotiation. In terms of where we're going to actually end up and be at, it's going to be in the next few months here before we start those conversations.
So
20% affordability, just to clarify, 20% affordability is a requirement of the grant as well that we receive for cleanup.
And you had said in a public meeting also that if there would be an effort to look for additional funding, so that might be raised. I don't know if it's too late in the project to do that, but I'm just concerned that given with the development at around the train station, we're just at the 10% affordability, right, for the units around the train station. So given the pressures in the state and more specifically in Norwalk, forgive me, but I'm going to be kind of a one-note nanny on nuisance on this regard, because I think there's a big concern about affordability. So, I know we have to make the numbers work, but it's really getting, as you know better than I do, it's getting to be a big problem.
Yeah, I mean, housing affordability in general, we discussed in the meeting, is a huge problem across the board. But what we can do at the public side of things is push as hard as we can and have as much insight into the numbers and analysis from the firm that we're using to push that needle as hard as we can while still making a project happen. But in terms of the public assistance, we received an $8 million grant to do the city capital, which is going to help. I think it's just about the policy decision about, what you're putting the resource in terms of the sale of the asset. Is that contributing towards additional affordable housing, or is that, helping offset the service need, drive, with the purchase price, to the city. So that's all negotiate, it's all things we have to negotiate.
Any other questions?
Alan, Brian, I'm in the wrong meeting.
Yeah, go ahead.
So can you give us an update on And I'm terribly sorry, I cannot remember what we're calling the project now, but can you give us an update on construction on the POCO project, the former POCO project, whatever it
Yeah,
is?
I can. We've been working closely with the JHM and DOH to finalize their capital stack in advance of a bond commission meeting. We anticipate DOH having their final approvals in, hopefully we're calling them regularly by the end of the month is what I'm hoping for. They will have to still go to the bond commission, which I don't know if they're going to have when they're going to have their meeting. But the idea is before the end of the year, we're starting construction, at least on either the public infrastructure piece or the actual project. It's going to just depend on the timing at the state level, but they're actively moving and they're trying to advance it now that the lawsuit's been settled.
Okay.
And the garden cinema's down. I don't know if you've been by there.
Yeah, and there's that other development that's going on. I think we approved it a long time ago.
911 Leonard and the one on the other
Leonard
side.
Street.
Yeah.
Yeah, it looks like it's starting and stopping,
Yeah.
kind of thing. But whatever.
Okay, so those are in terms of development projects. I just wanted to update you real quick on the sustainability and resiliency plan that we're managing on behalf of the city and our work with the ad hoc sustainability committee. We went through a number of focus groups last month. I think they were actually really productive. I think we worked with internal staff, also stakeholders, and elected officials. Compiling those results, the consultant did an initial gap analysis of our plans. They did a review of the zoning regulations in terms of sustainability, which we just received last week, or we just forwarded to the city today, that we're going to be going through to try to help with the zoning regulation update, given their concurrent timelines. But yeah, we expect a public outreach meeting, and I don't know, Katie, did they confirm August 2nd today? I know you were waiting for that.
They did this afternoon. Yep, August 2nd.
Is that's at 7 p.m. I think we
Yep.
talked about. Okay, so yeah, it's August 2nd, 7 p.m. is gonna be the first public meeting of that. So we'll make sure you all get the link if you'd like to attend. You'll see kind of where we're at and have a larger discussion about where we're going. Finally, we had a really interesting exercise with DKSR. If you recall, that Berlin-based firm, they came in and did a smart city needs assessment for Norwalk. And the way that was structured was through two tasks. The first was a data governance assessment, where they actually just sort of worked with IT department and more of a technical approach to figure out how data is governed and how it's managed throughout the city to get an understanding of what potential options and opportunities may exist. And then the second task was a smart city use case assessment in terms of, okay, we understand a little bit about how you manage your data, but how are you using your data, and what are some intelligent ways that you could use data to improve city operations. I did provide the sort of executive summary. I know it's probably a little dense and technical at this stage, but there was a presentation that you all might want to reference at the sustainability committee that the consulting team gave, kind of going over some really interesting findings. Some of the things that I found most interesting were related to this perception gap, where we had two workshops with the chiefs versus department heads. And they both thought that they were all in very different places, but in a consistent manner in terms of where they were at using data and how it was, in part of their day-to-day, which is a good finding because we're going to be working with, the city and trying to find out ways to help better align that through strategy and whatever the city's interested in based on the use case discussion that we had. And the use case discussion we had really saw opportunities in conservation. So like smart irrigation, or things we could better manage our water resources. Also maybe perhaps putting sensors in tree beds to help with drought management, making sure that things are getting watered so we don't have a situation, as we all recall, with Ryan Park where the trees kept dying, and maybe there was a technological solution that could have existed. So we've been working with the Parks Department to help advance that. And then also from transportation, mobility, and parking, there was a lot of opportunity there. So trying to figure out ways to integrate that into Webster Lot project, also 1517 Chestnut and our development projects. I think the most value that came out of that, though, was the fact that we were getting all the departments together talking about these things and understanding that there's some cross-pollination and opportunity between the various efforts that everyone's interested in doing, and trying to get everyone on the same page. And I think there's going to be an opportunity to continue the conversation through the sustainability plan, because a lot of that is focused on administrative structures So we're trying to find a way to bring the smart city needs assessment findings into the sustainability plan findings to help sort of advance the recommendations of both. So I'm happy to go into any detail on that, but that's the sort of high level.
No questions? All right, moving on to new business. Or you have anything else, Brian?
I'm done, John. No more, all right?
You mean done with this, this agenda?
Yeah, I'm good. I know.
Brian and I talked earlier, and right now there doesn't appear to be anything urgent to bring to the commission next month. So we're thinking about taking August off and then having a meeting again in September. And we discussed possibly having an in-person meeting. I just wanted to throw that out and see how the other commissioners feel about that. Would you favor an in-person meeting? I can't see everybody's face. I can't see the rest of the
Sure.
people.
Mary, sure.
Okay. How about we try having an in-person meeting in September, and then maybe again 3 or 6 months later, and go back to the Zoom meeting, which is convenient for in a lot of ways.
Would the time be 5:30 for an in-person meeting? Is it possible to do a little bit later? In person?
Sure. What do you mean, 6 o'clock better?
Yeah, I have to get my
Not
husband
8
home with the kids. 6
not
or
8 o'clock at
6:30.
night. Okay. 6 works for me. David, you okay with 6?
Well, if we have to, I mean, I don't really want to see any of you in person ever again.
Maybe we could just have this meeting in September and we don't have to do it again. Unless,
Sorry.
I leave it up to you. If you want to vote on it, do we want an in-person meeting? All in favor?
No, I'm
Okay,
happy
okay.
to do it. That's fine.
We'll do that one and we'll decide where we go from there. Anybody else would like to discuss anything, bring anything else up? No? Would anyone like? So our next meeting will be September. We'll send out a notice. It will be at the new offices. There's a big conference room there. And we'll see how that goes. And okay. Other than that, do I hear a motion to adjourn? I don't hear. Kelly, David seconded. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Didn't see Mary, but I assume it's unanimous.
Yes.
Have a nice summer. Enjoy August. And let's hope it doesn't get much hotter.
Yeah. Take care, everyone. Stay cool.
Have a good night, everyone.
Good night, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Good night. Thank you.